All right, so thanks for coming to our talk. Seems like we've got a packed house, so thank you all for coming. We're going to be talking about pen testing web services. So we're the web hacking ninja guys. If you're looking for a different talk, different room. All right, so yeah.
My name is Tom Eston. I'm a senior security consultant at SecureState. I'm a web app network pen tester. You probably have seen my previous talks with Kevin Johnson on social media, social networks. Founder of a website, socialmediasecurity.com. I co-host 2 podcasts, Security Justice and Social Media Security. You can find me on Twitter as Agent0x0.
So I'm Jabra, also known as Josh Abraham. For those of you who don't know, I code in Perl. I code
in Python.
Shut up.
Fight.
Shut up. I do penetration testing. I work at Rapid7. We do some cool stuff. We work on the Metasploit project, vulnerability assessment, that sort of stuff. I also do a lot of open source work, contribute to things like the Backtrack Live CD, Metasploit, Nmap, all these other projects, Beef. I do a lot of coding in Perl, so pretty much anything. Also helping people, get through their demos and all that stuff. So
he spent all day coding yesterday for Rich Mogul.
Yeah. So Rich Mogul's demo will be less fail on the fail panel. So yeah.
We are not Kevin Johnson, obviously. Unfortunately, Kevin Johnson could not make it. He had a family emergency, had to fly back around Black Hat. But I definitely wanted to mention Kevin's work in this presentation, and we'll be talking a lot about that. If you don't know Kevin, Kevin is an all-around great guy. He is an open source bigot, as he will tell you. He runs all those various projects that mentioned on the slide there. He's also a SANS instructor, and also founder of pentesterscripting.com, and you can find him on Twitter as Secure Ideas.
So we miss you, Kevin.
We miss you, Kevin.
Yep. All right, so here is the agenda for the entire talk. We're going to be talking about pen testing web services. So initially what we're going to do is we're going to go over like the state of the union of pen testing web services. What are web services? Who uses them? Why would you want to pen test them? And why is this relevant and why do you care? And then from there we'll be going through our methodology that we developed, and from there releasing some new tools, some new process, a threat model, and then at the end we're going to do all the demos and also releasing an exploit. So all that cool stuff all in 1 hour talk. So,
and we hope you like the movie Fight Club.
Yeah, we're
just gonna throw that out
there. A lot of references
there.
to Fight Club in this deck. So if you pick them all up, let us know.
This is Project Mayhem.
Stuff. We hope you guys enjoy it.
So why do we want to attack web services? Well, we found just through our research, and I'm sure any of you guys know that are pen testers, really those web services are really that secondary attack vector when it comes to any web application. We find that developers, well, just like any other web app, they really don't implement proper security controls. In fact, I would argue that sometimes the security controls are even more lacking than a regular web app, because these things are usually found outside of the web application. And of course, that it's assumed that only a client or another web service is going to connect to this. And of course, you know what happens when we assume.
Yeah, and in the industry, we're really pretty good at pen testing web apps. But how many pen testers out there really know about the process of pen testing web services? I would claim very few. So the developers are sort of like getting a free ride. If you have all these web services, if we're not pen testing them, what's their motivation to get them really locked down and secure? So that's sort of the reason why we did this research.
So some recent statistics, just in the mobile space, Kevin Johnson did a little experiment where he downloaded about 200 iPhone and iPad apps, and then he looked to see if any of those were using web services, and he found that actually all of them are using some form of web service, mostly RESTful web services, not necessarily SOAP. But it goes to show you that, especially in the mobile space, we're just seeing web service usage increase tenfold. This statistic here is interesting in itself because it's from a Microsoft Tag, which is Microsoft's implementation of 2D barcodes. That is probably a talk all in itself.
Definitely.
So we won't go there. But this is just kind of give you an idea that with web services and new technology, we're seeing a huge increase.
Yeah. So there's a large attack surface for everybody to start going after, and if the industry as a whole hasn't been really good about pen testing this sort of stuff, there's a huge gap for research, new tools, methodology, process, and probably a lot of vulnerable web services out there. So a lot of stuff. Okay, so in terms of web services, there's really 2 different types of web service, one of which is known as SOAP, and then the other one is known as REST. So as you can see, we're talking about I make and produce SOAP. So yeah, in essence, what SOAP is, everybody knows about web apps and doing like a post, communicating with a web application. Well, that's all well and good. When we talk about communications with a SOAP web service, what we're doing is we're including XML in that request, and the way that we construct that message is known as SOAP. So it's just XML with the SOAP construct, and that's how you would define the data inside of the message. So when you think of a SOAP request, think of email, so SMTP, instead of just a web application where you're making a request, getting a response. You could have multiple systems sending the SOAP message or envelope to other systems. So that's sort of the way to start thinking about it.
So Jabber kind of mentioned about REST, right? So I do a lot of developer training, I talk to a lot of developers, and we've really seen this departure from XML-based SOAP services over to RESTful, like JSON. So what's interesting, if you don't know what REST is, it stands for Representational State Transfer, and these use HTTP methods like Jabber was talking about, so your get, post, put, and delete. The reason developers like these is because they are lightweight, non-complex, they're good for mobile apps, good for quick data transmission. However though, and I want to make this point important, that SOAP is complex and it's for a reason. And during our pen tests, we find SOAP being used almost all the time in enterprise level applications. And of course, you know, enterprise level applications are holding very sensitive information. Data transfer such as credit card numbers and lots of other things go across SOAP-based services.
So, I mean, sort of right here is where you have the trade-off, right? Do you go after what's widely being used in the mobile side, or do you go after the enterprise? And since SOAP was more complex, we figured we'd go after the more complex stuff because we get a lot of, if you're pen testing JSON and that sort of thing, it's traditionally being used in some sort of web application that's also being used there. So we felt that if we were going to go after SOAP, some of those tools could be backported, since it's all HTTP anyway, into a RESTful web application testing process.
And don't forget large services. We've got Amazon EC2, PayPal, Microsoft Azure. These are large web services that use SOAP APIs, so we can't forget about those.
All right, so now we're going to start talking about a threat model for web services. So initially, right, when you build a web application or web service, the developers always need to know, what do you mean when you say a secure web service? What does that actually mean? Well, there's tons of different things. Usually when you have a web application, we want some sort of authentication if there's valuable data there. Also, we have to encrypt our traffic, so making sure that that's encrypted is a very important thing. A lot of developers, if they miss that step, we don't really need to do much else, because you can just hack one of the systems and then just sniff all the traffic. And when we get to the exploit, you're going to see how that's really, really useful. But in essence, there's tons of elements here, and we can't cover all of the different attack vectors. But one of which, if you think of XML, right, it's a really complex language, and you have all these SOAP things, so you have to be able to parse and look at that type of information. So potentially bugs in a parser, or the potential for injecting like code or commands into the application. So one of the things we're going to be talking about later is a sample web service, and you guys can see how that works. But you're going to get all the different attack vectors. SQL injection could be possible through a web service. If you're looking at passing username and password, there's potential for a lot of different flaws which we're seeing in web applications. It's just a different way of communicating. So here, if you take a look, either way, if you start out by having node 1 is going to be transmitting information all the way to node 5, well, if you're using SSL, that's going to be encrypting or securing your data in transit. But what does it do for the data on that box, right? If there's a sysadmin who's malicious, or maybe that one of those boxes, intermediate systems, gets hacked, what do you have to do to basically protect your data, right? What's to stop somebody from modifying the information, replaying that traffic, or just dropping your traffic? You don't have any assurance as to that type of a protection. So in that sort of a case, you may want to consider actually encrypting the entire SOAP message to provide that type of security, if that's an important thing. So in terms of who would use this sort of thing, you could have various third parties, so one organization transmitting to another, and then that information could be transmitted to another. So depending on how you're using web services, you would have to construct a threat model and protect against those different attack vectors depending on your use case. So in some situations SSL may be enough, but in others it may not work.
So the State of the Union here, really through our research, we found that there's issues with all kinds of things with web services. So how to properly scope a web service pen test, tools, testing process, methodology, techniques to test, education for developers and vice versa, and testing environments. So basically we come up to the conclusion that it is all broken and we have to do something about this. Like a single serving friend. So what we found too is really pen testers really don't know what to do with web services. I talk to a lot of pen testers and there's always this it seems like this mystery with web services, like it's a magical art to test web services. And really what it comes down to is it starts with scoping. So are you asking the right questions? Are you asking about web services when you scope out like a gray box web app pen test? Do you even know that there are web services in that application? Web services may be the most critical part of that web app, and if you don't ask the right questions, you're not going to know until you get into it, and then you find this out, and then you come across a couple hours later, and you've got to rescope the whole thing, and that wastes a lot of time and it wastes money. And of course, how do you test it? So do we use an automated approach, more manual? Unfortunately, most of the stuff we find is around manual testing. So, and of course, manual testing takes a long time, and when you have 1 or 2 days on a pen test, that's usually not feasible. So going to the testing methodology, really the only great guide that's out there, or guide at all, is the OWASP testing guide, which has a web service component in version 3. The guide itself is a fantastic guide for all web app pen testing, but however, the web service piece is really outdated. It's missing full coverage on recent threats and different types of threat models. So for example, man-in-the-middle attacks, client-side storage, host-based authentication. It's focused on old technology, so no mention of